Hi, everybody. This is Roctavia with Rock News UK, and I have Toby Jepson on the line with me, lead singer of Wayward Sons. Am I correct with that?
You certainly are, Roctavia. Yeah, absolutely spot on.
So go ahead and kind of tell us about yourself. Give us a little bit of background so that your international audience can get to know you a little bit better.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I guess the place to start really would be that I started my career in the UK as part of a band, the singer-songwriter in a band called the Little Angels. And we signed our first record deal with Universal Music, or Polydor actually, in 1989 when I was a very young boy. And we had a very successful career. We had a lot of hit records in the UK and around Europe, and we ended up with a number one album called Jam, which was the kind of pinnacle of the band's success. And we toured with a lot of bands like Van Halen and Bon Jovi and ZZ Top and all sorts of bands over a long, long period of time. And we reached a pretty high point. Our final gig that we did as a band, as the Little Angels, was at the Royal Albert Hall, which is a very famous place in London, and that was sold out. And that was our final gig, and we split up in 1994. And since then, I've been I was a solo artist, and I was writing songs for other people, and I got into production, and I produced various bands. And then I toured the world with a number of acts, including the Ronnie James Dio sort of a band that was put together after Ronnie James Dio passed away, called Dio's Disciples. And I toured as one of the singers for that foundation, which was for cancer support, and toured all over America with the band, which included the members of Ronnie's last band. And then I kind of came out of that, and that was round about I guess that was 2014 sort of thing, 14, 15. And I was all set to just carry on just being a record producer and writing songs for other people, which was my main thing that I did in the day.
Yeah.
My kind of day job, if you like. And but I got a call from a record label in Europe called Frontiers Music, they're a world-renowned label. In fact, they have one of their headquarters in Nashville in the US now. So they're international, and they just sort of said, look, we would love for you to get back on the horse and become a touring musician again. How do you fancy it? And I sort of said yes, why not? But I wanted to do it under my own kind of steam and under my own plan. So I gathered a group of musicians together. Nick Wastel, who's the bass player in Wayward Sons, Phil Martini, who's the drummer, who also plays with Joe Elliott's band Down and Outs. Joe Elliott, of course, from Def Leppard. Yeah. And a young guitar player called Sam Wood, who was a guy that I'd met via a band that I produced, previously. And we just put the band together, and it was a real labor of love. The first album, which was called Ghosts Who Yet to Come, was released going back 5 years now. So it's been out a while, and it was kind of an instant success for us in the UK. The radio was all over it. We started touring quite heavily with bands like Saxon and UFO and Inglorious, who are another UK band that are doing pretty well. And we sort of gained a foothold, and we're about to release our third album. We had another album in between called The Truth Ain't What It Used to Be, which came out just before the pandemic unfortunately hit. So we didn't have a chance to properly promote that record. So whilst the pandemic had its grips around the world, we managed to create our third album, which is called Even Up the Score, which is going to be released internationally on the 8th of October this year.
Oh, hey, new music.
New music.
Yeah. So like going back to the very beginning, like way back to the start, what inspired you to pick up whatever instruments that, spurred your passion the most, like guitar or just to become a musician in general? What drove that fire?
It's a very good question. A number of things. My Mum and Dad were big music fans, and they were children of the 60s. They were born late 40s. And so they were brought up around that wonderful time when music for the youth was beginning to really erupt around the globe, right? So they were listening to everyone from the Everly Brothers. I mean, obviously, sadly, one of the Everly Brothers passed away this week, of course, as we know. Yeah. But they listened to everything from the Everly Brothers right through to a lot of hard rock and rock that was starting to emerge through the 1970s. So I was born in 1967. So I was born the year the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Oh, wow.
And my dad was a big Beatles fan. So I grew up with my dad's record collection. And we didn't have TV in our house for years. My mum and dad weren't particularly wealthy people, so we didn't have TV for a long time. But what we did have was a fantastic record collection and my mum and dad's love of music, which was very eclectic. So I grew up listening to everything from the Mamas and Papas through to all the great soul records. My dad was a big soul fan, so he listened to Joe Tex and and all those amazing sort of Stax records and all that sort of stuff and all the Detroit sound. And so that was massively part of it. But then there was also all the British movement. So it was the Who, there was Kinks,
Yes.
all those amazing
Kinks.
Yeah, the Kinks. Yeah, and Ray Davies, one of the greatest songwriters of all time. But I remember being about, I guess I would have been maybe 8 years old. I would have been 8 years old because it was 1975. Yeah. So so I would have been around about 8 years old, I think. And I remember seeing Queen performing.
Jealous.
It would have been Bohemian Rhapsody, I think, on TV at I think it was at my granny's house, because my granny, she had TV and we didn't, right? So we were visiting my granny's house, and I remember seeing this almost like alien creature, performing this amazing song on TV. And I remember thinking to myself, that's what I want to do. That's amazing. I was absolutely captivated by who was obviously Freddie Mercury performing this incredible song. And I even remember I was wearing my dressing gown like a cape, and he had a cape on, I think, or my memory is that he was wearing a cape, and I was pretending to be him. And so that was my first kind of moment of wow moment in my sort of, I've got to do something. That's incredible. Who is that person? How do I do this? And so that was kind of the initial flushes of it. I mean, I grew then really the kind of the seed was planted. And I think from the age of about 10 years old through to when I was about 13, I started to discover my own taste, and I started getting into harder music, and I started listening to Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
And I was guided by some friends who were big rock fans, and they kind of gave me this. I borrowed records off my friends, and they would say, "Oh, check this out," and I'd get like Black Sabbath. I remember getting Black Sabbath Heaven and Hell album from a friend of mine who was a vicar's son, and his dad never liked him listening to Black Sabbath because he thought it was the devil's music, all this sort of stuff, and So he gave me the record, and I took it home and I listened to this album, and that, discovering Ronnie James Dio was a big moment for me. And but then really what happened was I wanted to be a guitar player, and I was in love with Jimi Hendrix. I thought Hendrix was one of my first passions, and I bought the Electric Ladyland record, and I listened to that album over and over and over again. And Are You Experienced, that record, and I just wanted to be Jimi Hendrix, and I wanted to play guitar, but I was never equipped, I think, emotionally with the kind of like the need for concentration on an instrument. So I tried to learn it, quickly got bored of doing it because it wasn't coming quickly enough, right? I got far more interested in songwriting, and I started to realize that the central premise of any great musician was the songs. I realized quite early on, probably about the age of 12, 13, that songs were it. It wasn't the guitar player. It wasn't the singer. These were all part of it, but it was the song that they were singing. That's really what it was all about for me. And it came, I'll tell you completely the truth. It came from one album. What really stimulated me as a songwriter was a Cat Stevens record, which was called Tiller and I think it was called Tiller and the Fire Cat. I think it's called. I'm sure it's called Teaser and the Fire Cat. And there was that album utterly captivated me from a song point of view. I didn't even think about who was playing the instruments. I thought about what the the great singer was telling me, what these stories were, what these tales were, what they were, what it meant, and how it meant, what it meant to me.
Right.
And so I started to write songs, and I only knew about 3 or 4 chords. But, you know, as anyone great writer will tell you, it is 3 chords and the truth. All you need is 3 chords. You don't need a huge experience of musicality and you know, a wealth of experience about, you know, all the intricacies of learning an instrument. So I quickly,
writing from the heart. That's pretty true, actually. You know,
totally. Yeah. You don't need. I mean, listen. Some of the greatest songs in the world have got 2 chords in them. Mm-hmm. You know, some of the greatest songs in the world are written as an idea. They're not necessarily a musical extravagance. You know, so there's a kind of, and I had this light bulb moment. It's like an epiphanal moment. I thought, you know what I want to do is I want to tell stories. And I want to talk to people. I want to raise questions. I want to have that conversation. And so my immediate, from that point onwards, my immediate focus was writing songs. And I wasn't very good at it to start with. In fact, I was terrible, but you got to start somewhere, right? So so what I did was I used to rip off. I used to basically try and copy, you know, other people's songs, like we all do. That's how you start. And I slowly evolved into a songwriter. And I think, from a principal point of view, I would regard myself as a songwriter first, a singer and a performer second, and then a record producer probably third or fourth type of thing. So but I think it's the songs that are the most important thing. I think, you know, somebody said something to me years ago, I think always remained with me, is that, and this was a very famous record producer who we were working with. And I said, what do you think is the most important 3 lessons you can learn as a musician, as a writer, as a performer? And he said, you know what? He said, there's 3 things that are important about this business. And he said, they're the only things that matter. And I said, okay, what is? And he goes, the songs, and the songs. And I thought that's one of the greatest things I've ever heard. And I've always lived by that if you don't have the song, you have nothing.
Very true. I mean, what are we doing here if there's no song?
Yeah, right.
I was going to ask you, who are your musical heroes, like your absolute musical heroes, but you kind of beat me to that one.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got very wide tastes, and I don't personally view music within a bracket. I'm not interested in saying, oh, I'm a hard rock fan, or I'm a heavy metal fan, or I'm a this fan, or that fan. I'm a music fan. And so my influences range from, you know, everything from great pop music of the 1970s, you know, which could be anything in lots of respects. It could be the Sweet to some people, or it could be the Kinks, or it could be the Bee Gees, or it could be ABBA, you know. So
yeah.
What a great band, you know, what a great songwriter. So I focus my interest in music in whatever gets me excited. And that's wide. But I just happen to love the sound of guitars more than anything else. So, and there is a certain element of energy that comes off a real band playing real instruments, you know, with real music and with real messages. That's where it all sits for me. So that could be Blondie from 1978, or that could be the Foo Fighters today, or it could be Slayer back in the day. You know what I mean? It could be
some music. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have any I don't have any time for people who say, man, I just like that, and that's all it is. I like anything as long as it's great.
I can relate to that for sure. I think a lot of starting off with like a musical home, I think that's where it comes from, your parents' record collection, because normally when you have your parents with that stack of vinyl or their turntable and you're curious about it as a kid, and they're not just going to be listening to the same stuff. You know, usually if you have vinyl, there's going to be a variety there. But I can definitely relate. I find my music from what sounds good, what inspires feeling, what inspires emotion, it's something that communicates through any language. Doesn't matter what language you are. I mean, your singer may be singing in a certain language, yes, but the feeling, the chords, the vibe, that's usually where it comes from. I could listen to anything from Dolly Parton on one part of my playlist, and then the other part of my playlist has Finnish dinosaur rock. And yes, that is a thing. I know,
You know what?
Weird, but one of my favorite bands is Heavy Saurus. It's a plug there, but yeah.
Love it, love it. No, you're absolutely right, and I think we would have a kind of far more, I think, sort of a far more enjoyable time if people felt a little bit more that way inclined. You know, I mean, if I think about my record collection, and the bands that I've been to see, you know, one of the greatest gigs I ever saw was in New York at the Beacon Theatre with Was Not Was, you know, with Don Was and all those great sort of modern soul musicians and modern R&B, you know, I would class as a kind of R&B band, you know, absolutely killer with a kick horns blasting. And then the day after, we were watching Yngwie Malmsteen play at some venue, you know, playing this kind of like symphonic rock, you know. And then I'd go and see the Rolling Stones, you know, whatever. And I for me, it's all part of the same pie. It's just depends what edge you're nibbling, you know. That's all I care about. And I think that's the truth of it, you know. And there's some great music today. There's some great pop music today. Some really great songwriters out there, and there's some fantastic rock music emerging. So it's about the quality. It's about the message. It's about the idea for me. It's what's coming out of the singer's mouth. It's what's coming out of the bands, what they mean, what their narrative is, what they're trying to help us with, what they're trying to tell us, you know, those sorts of things. That's what's important to me.
Yeah. The Rolling Stones, yeah, they were a huge influence on me. We just lost Charlie Watts today.
Yeah.
Fortunately, he was a legend.
Very sad.
He was an amazing drummer. He had a huge influence in like different genres of music in general. So that's another thing about being well-rounded in music. Like, I feel like that's where your legendary status comes from. Getting out of your comfort zone.
Totally. And I think, you know, if you only have to look at sort of like a band like the Rolling Stones to realize where they came from, you know, and how that became formed. You know, people call them a foundation band, but really they were taking their influences from black music in America. Yeah. And they were using that influence of those amazing records that came onto English shores and was listened to through transistor radios that was crackling through the airwaves. Yeah. You know, that's how they got their influences, but they were deeply seated in what we would call roots music, really, mm-hmm. and then reevaluating it for their generation. So my generation regarded the Rolling Stones as a foundation band. You know, I mean, I look at the Rolling Stones and I remember when I heard, you know, Honky Tonk Woman or Street Fighting Man for the first time. You know, I got the same feeling of the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I did when I first heard Metallica's Black Album, or Metallica, you know, actually Kill 'Em All when I first heard Metallica. It's the same thing to me. It's what it does to your soul. It's how it attaches itself to your soul and how it makes you feel. That's the important bit.
Very true. My first Stones experience was actually because of a movie, The Devil's Advocate, and in the credits they used Painted Black. That was the first time I ever heard the Rolling Stones. I was a little girl, and I was like, "That sounds so cool. What is that, Mom?" My mom was like, "Hey, it's the Rolling Stones, kiddo. Like, look them up." Yeah. She's like, "You want me to play you?" I'm like, "Play it for me. Lay it on me. I love it."
Absolutely, yeah. And you can't. I think the great thing about the Rolling Stones as a good example is that they were intuitive musicians. They were instinctive about their understanding of the world. You know, they took it as a very kind of, there was a kind of almost like a very natural, almost supernatural, I think, feeling of what their music meant to them and how that then transferred. Because what we're really talking about here is about communication. You're talking about how you communicate an idea to other people through music, words and music. And that's the key thing. The greatest artist in the world. I mean, my favorite artist of all time, if I was to put my absolute finger on, is David Bowie. David Bowie's, yeah, the most important artist I think has ever trodden the planet, in my opinion. Very close next to Queen, who are my favorite band, and also the Beatles. The Beatles, you know, and the Rolling Stones. You know, they're all on they're on the higher planes. They're right up there in a way that very few ever reach. And there's no explanation apart from they just had that magic thing, whatever that magic thing is. And I don't even want to discuss it. I don't even want to try and figure it out. I just love it, whatever it was, you know. And so you take someone like David Bowie as a good example. There's something very ethereal, something very supernatural. That's why they used to call him the alien, because no one could understand why.
Exactly.
No one could understand why, you know. But I've grown up with David Bowie, and my favorite record of all time is Hunky Dory. That to me is the perfect album. It's the greatest collection of songwriting, pretty much, I think, on any record ever released.
Yeah.
And I would put that above Sgt. Pepper. I would put it above any of the real great records. But here's the thing. That's only my opinion. Right? We've all got that. We're not. There is no right. There is no wrong.
We all have our ways. Opinion. Yes.
And that's what.
We all have our ways we discover our legends. That's true. But I can relate to everything that you just said, because even though my experiences were like different jumping off points, because a lot of mine began with movies. My love for Jim Henson and his partnership with David Bowie for Labyrinth. That's how I was introduced to David Bowie and his music, because he scored that, the whole thing. He was, I love how Jim Henson was just like, run with it. Yeah, there's something, you're right, ethereal. There's something so special about musicians that don't really care what, the textbook thing out there is. They just embrace what they feel and they become that icon, because they're doing things before everybody else does, and then they're the ones that get followed in the footsteps. So I don't know. I know you said it's to each his own, essentially, but I agree.
Well, here's the thing. To be unique isn't something you can invent. To be special is in the eyes of the beholder or in the ears of the listener, right?
Right.
So these things cannot be explained and shouldn't be. They shouldn't be examined. We do examine them. We want to know. We want to try and find out. But the reality is certain people just have that thing and find a way to essentially understand themselves and connect with themselves deeply and allow the art to become their front and their thing that demonstrates them. Some people do it better than others. There just happens to be sometimes those that are infinitely more connected to themselves. So that's what it really comes down to. There's nothing magical about David Bowie, really. He's a human being. But what he's really got is he's got a full understanding of himself and his art, and how he expresses himself. My big problem with a lot of the only problem I have with modern music, and a lot of music really, is that people get obsessed with familiarity.
Yeah.
Too many bands sound the same.
Scary, which is weird.
Well, because the thing is, it's a more frightening proposition to be 100% honest and wear your heart on your sleeve and be honest about how you really feel. That's a lot more frightening than saying, well, you tell you what, I'll just copy that dude over there because he's kind of made a point I kind of want to make, but I don't want to say it my way.
Right.
It's very frightening. People aren't able to unlock themselves. And I think the artists that do, the fearless artists that really do, like your John Lennons and your David Bowies and your Paul McCartneys and whoever else we want to cite as these amazing sort of trailblazers, what they really have done isn't that remarkable. What they've really done is they've just gone, you know what? I'm fearless. I'm prepared to say these things. I'm prepared to make a fool of myself. I'm prepared to go that distance and really examine myself and not be afraid of what the consequences are. Because David Bowie didn't make every record he made wasn't a masterpiece. There were some pretty rough duds in the middle, but he knew that. He knew that he was just on his journey and he wasn't afraid of it. And I think that's the key point. I think I would say to any young band, and I do produce bands, they say, what's the key thing? I say, be yourselves. Don't be afraid to talk about the thing in the way that you want to talk about it, because you know what? That's your truth. That's the way you speak, and that's the way that you want to examine that subject matter. Copying, being another version of I don't know, let me think of a band. I don't know. Any band, Blackstone Cherry. Why do we need another Blackstone Cherry? We don't need another one. We don't need another Alter Bridge. We don't need another Guns N' Roses. We need you. We need your version of music. You know what I mean? So that to me is part of the problem, especially since the internet and the way that the internet allows everyone to release music, which is a good thing. but also I think can be a bad thing because it's no gatekeepers. It's just a free for all. And the trouble is half of it sounds precisely the same as the other half. So,
Speak your truth. More powerful words have never been spoken.
Exactly. Speak your truth and do not be drawn in by the charlatans.
Oh, I love it. Woo! So we've been just waxing poetic music and like all this stuff. I need to get to your band. We could be talking hours.
Go on, girl.
We're running out of time. We got to cover Wayward Sons here. So let's get a little bit more into how Wayward Sons became Wayward Sons. How'd the band form?
Okay, well, like I said, I got the call from Serafino and Mario at Frontiers Music, which is an Italian rock label, and they're famous for putting together kind of project bands. And they called me and said, look, would you be willing to do something? I said, yes, okay, I will, but it has to be under my own guidelines. So I had worked for quite a long time with a guy called Nick Wastel, and Nick Wastel was the bass player in quite a successful English band called Chrome Molly, who were a heavy metal band that came out around about the same time. They weren't a metal band, but they were like a punk-inflected rock band. So we sort of thought they were heavy metal, but they kind of came out around about the same time as Def Leppard and Iron Maiden had started to emerge. And they were pretty successful, but they split up. And then I started working with Nick a few years ago, and we got back in touch with each other. In fact, back in the day, my band Little Angels used to tour with Chrome Molly, so I got to know him quite well. So when I got the call from Serafino, Nick was my first port of call, because there's a couple of things about Nick. Very intelligent guy, fantastic bass player, and I think we were on the same wavelength with regard to our musical taste. So he was my first call. I then called Sam Wood, the guitar player in the band, who is a young guy. He's the youngest in the band. I think he's only just been 30 years old. So he's, I think that's young anyway. He probably doesn't feel very young to you, but he's very young as far as I'm concerned. And he's a masterful guitar player. And he'd been in a band called the Trees and Kings, which were an English alt rock band. And I'd produced their EPs. And I'd spotted Sam from a distance. I thought, he's a really clever, tasty guitar player. So when this project came around, he was my first call. I thought, no, I'll speak to Sam and see if he's interested. And he was immediately interested. And then my final call was to Phil Martini, who's our drummer. And Phil famously was playing with Joe Elliott's band Down and Outs, which is one of his side projects. And it was a kind of the wildest situation because I put the whole thing together through a series of online meetings and phone calls, but none of us have ever been in a room together. So I booked a rehearsal room, which was Peter Gabriel's studio because I live near a town called Bath.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, Peter Gabriel's studio is about 12 miles from me. We both live near a town called Bath, which is in southwest of England. So I booked this rehearsal room. It's a place I'd used quite a bit. And with my heart in my mouth, I asked all the band to turn up to this rehearsal. And the first day that we arrived all together was the first day that we had all met properly. So it was quite a shock. It was like, I knew them all kind of privately, but they hadn't met each other. So we spent 3 days working on ideas, and no word of a lie, 7 of the songs that ended up on the first album, we put together the bones of in those 3 days.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
So we really connected as people. And a close friend of mine, a guy called Dave Kemp, who ended up in the band later on, who's a keyboard player, he joined in as well, and he was sort of part of the project. Eventually joined the band for a period of time. He's no longer with us at the moment, but he comes and goes sort of thing. But he joined in, and it just worked. And it was one of those situations where I didn't even want to question it. I trusted my instincts. I thought to myself, you know what? Rather than trying to analyze why, let's just make music. And we ended up in a studio, Vale Studios, which is in Worcestershire, near about sort of 100 miles away from me. And we made this album, the first album, which was called Go See Yet to Come. And I didn't have any, I didn't anticipate whether it was going to be successful. I didn't really care whether it was going to be successful. I just felt compelled to make the music. Mm-hmm. So when we released the first song, which was called Until the End, I was kind of totally non-prepared for the reaction. And the reaction was like immediate. It was like every radio station that plays rock and roll in the UK A-listed it on their playlists.
Ooh,
we got
right to A-list.
Yeah, and we got front covers of magazines. We were doing interviews. All of a sudden, we're playing Download, and we've got offers for gigs opening for Saxon. We were playing our own show. You know, it was like, oh my God, I didn't expect this, you know. And we were just immediately taken from a total fledgling nothing band to major interviews, big gigs, great radio reaction, and it was a total shock. I mean, it really was. I mean, but I kind of took a lesson from that. I thought to myself, you know what? It's because we weren't thinking too hard about it. It's because we were all fresh and we were all interested in creating something that the juicy started to flow really easily, you know. And really, since then, it hasn't stopped. We made our second album a year or two later called The Truth Ain't What It Used to Be. We made that in 2018, released it at the beginning of 19, and unfortunately, of course, the back end of 19, rather, sorry, in October in 2019, we released the second record, and we toured Europe with Black Star Riders and Steel Panther.
Steel Panther, fun time. Y'all probably had a good time.
Oh mate, honestly, mate, it was unreal. I mean, those guys are great. I mean, it's a big joke, of course, you know, but you know, like, you know, I'm like Russ, who obviously his character is Satchel, you know, he was a massive fan of the band, you know, and he put us on tour with them, and we toured all over Europe, playing to thousands of people, packed houses. And we got off that tour and the pandemic hit, and the album had only just been released a month or two before. So it was like, it was so depressing, you know, because the whole...
Like 2020 was supposed to be the year of the rock resurgence. I could see it coming.
Right.
I was ready for it. All these rock bands, like old and new, they were gearing up for an epic year. They were everyone's faces were supposed to be melted.
Right.
Hopefully we can get back around to that at some point.
I think we will. I think we will. It's starting. The green shoots are starting to appear here now. There's a reticence. I mean, you know, we made our third album, which we're releasing October the 8th, through Frontiers again. It's called Even Up the Score. We made it in lockdown by and large, and we're releasing it in October, like I say, and we're holding our breath a little bit because there's still a reticence in the UK and in Europe for people to go into indoor shows.
Mm-hmm. It's happening in the US now too, as well. More things are starting to get canceled. So I'm just hoping that, you know, we can rein everything in, and we can get back to, like, you know, not just our friends, our music families, our venues, our fan friends, you know, get back to that feeling, because you guys love it just as much as we do in the audience. So.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? I've always been a fan first and a musician second, without a doubt. I mean, I was that kid that queued up in the rain to buy the new Rainbow album or the new Black Sabbath record. You know, I was that kid that queued up amongst 2,500, 3,000 people to watch Whitesnake play in Queen's in the Queen's Hall in Leeds. I was that kid. You know, I was that one who was like crushed at the front of the barrier. I've been there. I know what that feels like. And
same. I've had like bruised ribs and like rail rash. I'm right there.
Hey, it's a rite of passage, isn't it? You know, and I know what that feels like. And I've always said that, you know, the fans are the most important thing. You know, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's absolutely true. Without the fans, bands are nothing. Yeah. Without the fans, there are no bands. You know, and it's the total truth. You know, and so we understand that. And you know, I know. I mean, we played our first festival show in the UK in front of 5,000 people a couple of weeks ago, a Welsh festival called Steelhouse. And believe me, I was really nervous. First time in my life I've had nerves, because
those festivals, they can like get you in the beginning, but like once you really get the crowd cooking and everybody's like, you feel that energy come up for your music, those nerves dissipate real quick.
Oh, they do. But I'm more talking about the fact that the pandemic had affected the way that we all felt about that.
Oh, you know, I see.
You know what I'm saying? Because I played, I mean, believe me, I've played festivals in front of 110,000 people. I've done some enormous gigs in my life, you know. And I played Donington download, I think 13 times or something as an artist, one way or another. So I know what it feels like to be in front of huge audiences. But this time, because the fact we'd come out of 16 months of lockdown, and 16 months, not 16, but, you know, we'd come out of the last lockdown and we'd been away from music for 16 months. I stepped on that stage, and we'd had this really weird weekend because we were supposed to play at this festival. Wayward Sons were supposed to play at this festival at, say, 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the Saturday, say, right? Mm-hmm. But our drummer, who lives in Portugal, had got pinged by our track and trace system in the UK. So he had to self-isolate for 10 days, which meant we couldn't play the gig on the Saturday, right?
Oh, boy.
So we were like, oh no, what are we going to do? So I ended up stepping into the breach and played an acoustic gig of songs from my past, from my successful band way back. Mm-hmm. First gig I'd done in 16 months, 5,000 people on my own with a guitar. It was nerve-wracking. And I don't get nervous at a gig. I really don't.
I wouldn't peg you to.
Honestly, man, it was just unrivaled. So I kind of did this, and then we played. We then played on the Sunday. They gave us another slot on the Sunday, and it was fantastic. It was a real tonic, and we realized, you know, immediately that the audience were as hungry for this as we were to play. So, you know, we're playing a couple of gigs this weekend. We've got another big festival that we're playing in the Midlands, and then we're doing another festival on the day after. And I know that people are desperate to see music. So I don't think it's anything to do with that. I think it's more to do with, there's a kind of, I think the after effects of the pandemic has been that people have got used to worrying, and they're not used to going out anymore, and it's going to take a while for that to come back, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. I just going out recently to some larger gigs, I still was cautious about everything, because it's not just about me. I always have that sentiment. It's not just about me. It's about how I affect others too. You know, with this, even though I'm vaccinated, I'm still trying to be safe, still trying to be smart about things. So,
because you're a citizen of the world like me, and we have to take these responsibilities, you know, seriously.
Yeah.
This is an unprecedented event that's happened only in our lifetime. The last time it happened was 100 years ago. You know, we have to take this seriously, and you know, we've got a responsibility to each other, and that's the way I value it. And I think, you know, things will return to normal, but it's going to take a couple of years.
Yeah, I can see that. But with Wayward Sons, how'd you guys come up with your name and everything like that? Where did that come from?
Aha, well, that's a great story. Okay, real quick. When I was a kid, the first time I ever went to a rock club, when I was a kid, I was 14 years old, but I was always 6 foot tall. And so I always was able to kind of get into things that perhaps a lot of other kids couldn't. So I ended up going to this rock club in my local town. And I swear to God, this happened. I was walking up the steps, and the Kansas song, Carry On My Wayward Son, was on the disco speakers, right? And it was like a moment of recognition. I sort of went, oh my God. And I was like the first one in the venue, because I figured that if I went there first, I would get in. I don't even know why I made this assumption, but I thought, well, I'll wear my dad's donkey jacket and I'll wear my dad's big shoes, and I'll go in and I'll try and blag my way in. But the girl who was taking my money didn't even question it. She just went, yeah, go in. So I went in. I was so euphoric that I'd got into this venue, and that song was playing when I entered the building. And I've never forgotten that. And then years later, because it kind of represented a sense of freedom to me, I'd kind of been given this license to go into this rock venue, you know. But then years later, with Little Angels, a band I started out at, I wrote a song called Kicking Up Dust, and I paraphrased Kansas, and I paraphrased the title, and I had the title went, Johnny never cared about nobody because nobody cared about John. He crawled his way this far through life. He's the original Wayward Son. And that was in the lyric of the song. And that song became a big hit for the band. And so I always kind of thought to myself, if I ever have a solo band, I'm going to call the band Wayward Sons, because I've had that connection with that song and that title for so many years that it must mean something.
I had wondered if that song had an influence. And I guess
completely.
That knack was right.
Completely. And I'm not going to hide that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. It absolutely did.
Awesome. So what is one of the most memorable moments for you and the band thus far?
We played one of the big tents at Download 3 years ago now, and the band that we got booked on, and I know Andy Coppin very well, the guy that runs Download. He's a legend in the UK,
right.
Andy Coppin, and he's been a very close friend of mine for years. He helped my band, the first band way back. We're good buddies, and but he's a businessman. He doesn't just give me shows just for the sake of it. He says, well, you know, if it's worth it, Toby, I'll give you a gig. And I really appreciate that, because I don't have no sense of entitlement at all. Just because I had a #1 record doesn't mean I have got to carry on being supported. I've got to be good enough, you know? So he booked the band into Download. And of course, Download's a massively successful and very, very important rock and roll festival.
Mm-hmm.
So we played the tent. We played one of the big tents, and we were on with a number of bands, and we were third on in the day, right? So we played maybe 3 in the afternoon, something like that. It was a red hot weekend, and the band that went on before us was fronted by a guy called Mike Gray, who was quite a successful guitar player, and he had a really reasonable audience. He had, like, say 1,500 people watching him. The tent's massive. It must hold 5,000 people. It's a huge tent, you know. So I'm thinking, if we get that audience, I'll be really pleased, because that's a big audience for someone like me, you know, coming back and all the rest of it. So I went and got changed. Our roadies, our crew put our gear on the stage. And as I walked up the ramp to the gig, the tent was packed to the gunnels. It was so full that the people couldn't get in. They couldn't get in through the tent flaps. It was 10, 20 deep people down the back. So we went on totally open-mouthed to this rapturous applause and this rapturous reception by this audience we didn't know we had. And we played half an hour. And to this day, it's one of the most exciting gigs I've ever played, because it gave me this understanding that the band had really connected beyond what I thought we'd connected beyond, if you know what I mean. And because Download's a really good barometer of whether bands are going to be successful or not, because people have to walk around the site. It's a massive site. It's like, I guess it's like Lollapalooza or any of those huge events, you know. It's got 7 stages. It's 120,000 people go to it. You have to choose who you watch, you know. So the very fact people had chosen to watch us at 3 PM on a red hot day in a tent that had its own atmosphere, like clouds were forming in the roof, you know, that meant something. That meant something. So that was, I think that's, to me, is the highlight so far from a live point of view, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty impressive. On the lighter side, what do you guys, when you're out, what do you do, like, just to kick back and relax? What do you do for fun to keep sane?
Well, I'm a big movie fan, so I go to the cinema. I mean, I know it sounds very boring, but I'm
no, not me.
I love movies. You know, I've grown up with films. I own a small independent film company to make films, so I direct and write and direct. So that's a massive part of my life. It's another side to my life. And so I always take myself to the cinema. It's not very rock and roll, but I like museums. I like, you know, if I'm in Europe, right? If I'm in Europe and we're traveling through Europe and we're doing gigs, if I've got a morning off or something, I will go to a museum or an art gallery, or I'll walk. My other favorite thing is just to walk through the city centre in the rain or something, just experiencing the town, you know. So I do that. The keyboard player who's no longer with us was the funniest one. He was a train spotter. He used to like to go to railway stations and look at
no way. Okay.
Yeah, he did. That's true. So that's quite funny. I mean, Phil, you know, Phil Martini, the drummer, is a very spiritual guy. He's I think Phil's a very connected guy, you know, and he's got some very strong feelings about nature and stuff. So I think Phil's very much into that sort of stuff. You know, we like to go to bars. I mean, we know we're a bit rock and roll, but not really. I think a lot of us like to have a cup of tea and go to bed early, that sort of thing these days, because we're all old guys, you know. But I treat touring and I treat those sorts of things as a kind of, it's a privilege to be out seeing these towns and meeting new people. So I don't like to
squander it.
get terribly drunk and fall
Right.
over and not be able to get up the next morning because A, I wouldn't be able to sing, and B, I'm just too old for that shit. You know, right?
So can you tell us a little bit more about your most recent single, Faith in Fools?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm a very political person. But I think I'm a humanist first and foremost. And my understanding and my interest in politics is based in the fact that politics is all around us. Every single moment that we live, something is affected by politics one way or another. And I'm not using it in the kind of like, you know, the guy who stands up there in a suit. I'm talking about the way that we interact with each other and how decisions made on our behalves affect us all, right? Okay, so I've always been, I'm a supporter of left-wing politics. I believe in social politics, and I know that social politics means something different in America. And I've visited America many, many times and had many, many arguments with many, many Americans about this. I don't believe social politics is anything to do with communism or anything that nonsense. It's not. You know, social politics is about trying to look after us all, about trying to give everyone a chance and give everyone a voice. I'd like everyone to be wealthy. I'd like everyone to have a nice house. I'd like everyone to drive a nice car and everyone to be well and be loved and be cared for. That's social politics, right? That's the way I view it. So my world as a person has been examining that, and my stories and my anger and my want to disagree and my want to protest is against anyone who disagrees with that concept that we're all equal, that we all have the right. We all have the right to live. We all have the right to behave and be loved and be cared for, right? This is the way I believe. This is nothing to do with skin color, religion, creed, position in life through wealth. To me, it's an utter load of bollocks. You're either a good person or you're a bad person, and that needs to be protected, and we need to be encouraging that. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only thing that matters, and I think it's inextricably linked with the arts. I think the arts have always been a place to protest. We've always talked about what is wrong with the world through the arts, because whilst artists are talking about what is prejudicial or what is discriminative amongst certain factions of the community, behind us are the men in the grey coats making the rules and regulations for their own endeavor. They're not doing it for us. They're doing it for their crony friends so they can all make a load of money and they can be better off than the rest of us. And that's what I protest against. And I've done that all of my life as a songwriter, since the very early days when I used to write songs to where I am now. So taking that into account, Faith in Fools is a good example of my songwriting style. It talks about the very actual fact that if you decide to believe the bullshit and the lack of trust of things like science and anything to do with people that are finding better ways for us to live, if you decide to side with the people that say, no, that's not true, then you are a fool. If you put your trust if you put your faith in fools, if you put in the barefaced liars, if you put your faith in those people, you have only got yourselves to blame. And when all the shit comes down, you've got no one else to blame but yourself. And as far as I'm concerned, it's very easy to spot these people. We've got one running our country right now.
Segueing. I have to remain neutral.
I don't.
So on that note, can you tell us what is in the very near future for Wayward Sons? I know you told us that you guys were working on an album, and that'll be out in October. So hopefully, are we going to get to hear it live? Is there anything planned?
Well, I mean, absolutely. We're already playing the songs. We're already playing Faith in Fools. Actually, our next single is called Bloody Typical, which is that's coming out pretty soon over here. But it will be internationally released, obviously, through digital media and all the digital platforms we know, so that'll be available for anyone who's interested to check that out. So we are already playing the songs live. I've got an absolute desire to come to the US and play. It would be fantastic. The only problem that we've got is that we've had the disaster that is Brexit over here. And so there's a kind of sense of none of us know as musicians and as artists how that's going to affect our traveling plans with regard to exiting the UK. Now, of course, that isn't to do with the US expressly, but it has a knock-on effect in terms of how we tour generally. So there's a sort of pause at the moment about how we can deal with all that. I would love to come to the US and play. I've played in America a lot, and I would dearly love that to happen. And of course, like I say, one of our record labels headquarters is in Nashville. Great guy called Nick.
City.
Yeah, exactly. And a great guy called Nick Teeder runs that label, and for the European label. So there is a real positivity about the possibilities. But in the immediate future, I choose to be realistic. We want to get the record out. We will tour in the UK in November at a headline level. So we're playing sort of big clubs. And then we will hopefully head into Europe next year if we can find a way of doing that. We've got festivals. We're opening Download, the whole of the Download Festival. We're opening it next year. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But I'm focusing on the album. I want the album to be given the best possible shot we can. And I'm really proud of it. I really feel, and I know pride becomes before a fall. I know that. But I think it's the best material I've ever written, and I think it's the best record the band have put out. I really do. It's our third album, and I think we've really hit our stride.
Amazing. So I know you and I kind of talked a lot about cinema and our mutual love for cinema. So I usually go out on a kind of off-the-cuff question, just a little fun question. If you could front the soundtrack for any 80s movie, what movie would it be and why? Any
80s movie?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So it's one of my favorite eras of filmmaking. Goodness me, that's a toughie because there's so many great examples. I think I'd have to go for something, even though it's kind of crazy because rock and roll would have to suit a certain kind. So Ferris Bueller's Day Off. How about that?
Cool.
maybe I'd have written the songs for that. And because I think it's an incredibly happy, brilliantly written examination of a kind of crazy sense of what the 80s meant, probably in America, but it meant very much the same to me in the UK. I was a young kid. I was a teenager. I was watching, that amazing film and those anarchic characters and that fantastic sort of central ethic of having freedom and the youth being the future and everyone embracing fun. And the 80s felt so a world of possibilities, didn't they? Like that was the thing about the 80s. It was like, oh my God, anything's possible. We can do anything here. And I think that film in many ways is one of the key films, but there are so many, The Breakfast Club, the Goonies,
Yeah. I do love your Ferris Bueller answer because the reason why I usually dress in a suit jacket and I take my interviews seriously, but I'm headed to a Cubs game in a little bit here. So that's why I have my Cubs gear on. And I love that you said that, everything in this interview just meshed and clicked.
There you go.
I appreciate your time so much. We're coming to the end of our time together. Rock News UK thanks you so much for your time, Toby. I'm going to give you the floor to go ahead and again tell everybody about what you want to get out there, your handles on social media, whatever you want to do. The floor is yours right now.
Okay, great. Well, Wayward Sons are heading your way one way or another, whether it be digital, whether it be visual through YouTube. We have all the normal platforms. It's waywardsonsband.com. So you just best thing to do is to check out the website, and all of our social media access is through that. All our records are on sale there. All our merch is available through that. All our tour information is through that. What we intend to do is just kind of make as good a music and do as many gigs as we possibly can. And I would hope that there's a good chance that some of you fine folk will check us out and give us a listen and maybe take a chance on buying the album. You won't be disappointed. It's rock music with a slightly different twist.
I love it. Thank you again, Toby. I am Roctavia with Rock News UK, and this has been our chat with Wayward Sons. And I will see you guys soon. Thanks, Toby.
Thanks a lot. Take care.